Right. Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight to listen to the best trees for suburban yards talk. So this particular talk, we're going to kind of dive into a few of the best trees that are going to be for different situations you might encounter in suburbia or more urban type settings. Some of these trees will do really well right next to a street. Some of these trees are bigger and probably better suited for your backyard, but still will do just fine in a suburban urban situation. And just a couple housekeeping things. So I did have it set so that everybody should be muted upon entry, but if you are not muted, go ahead and mute yourself, please. If you have any questions that pop up while I'm talking, please go ahead and enter those in the chat box as they pop into your head. And as I get done with the program, I will go ahead and answer those questions at the end. And if you have questions at the end, you can go ahead and ask me then as well. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in. So things you didn't know about trees. We'll learn a few interesting things. Some of you may know them, some of you may not. So recently, this last year, I became a certified arborist. It's a pretty long process. You have to at least be in the industry for about 3 years minimum before you can even sit for the test. And then you have to ask permission from the International Society of Arboriculture to sit for the test. So it takes quite a bit of effort and quite a bit of studying in order to even qualify to sit for the test. And then it's 200 questions, very long, very involved, and really there's a lot of studying goes into it. It was very interesting, and I'm very glad I had the opportunity to do that. I do a lot of diagnostics for people on a day-to-day basis. If you have problems with your trees, if you have issues, bugs, insects, fungal issues, wondering if your tree is going to die, why are branches dying, so on and so forth, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to take a look at photos. I am listed on the ISA website as for diagnostics. We don't do on-site visits for liability reasons. So I basically do level 1 visual assessments via pictures. I've gotten pretty darn good at it. So between that and just a Q&A with the tree's owner, I'm usually able to kind of narrow any problems that we might be having down and try to figure out what might be going on. So, some interesting facts. Did you know that trees can talk to each other? Yes, they can. It's like tree Wi-Fi. It's kind of cool. Did you know that there's something called crown shyness? So if you ever are out in a forest, a secondary forest, not just like a pine forest, you're probably going to notice it more in a hardwood forest. And if you look up, it's probably easier in the spring, but what you'll see is what you see on the bottom left, which is a lot of times the canopies will grow right up next to each other, but they don't overlap. So that's called crown shyness. So also, there are a few interesting facts in the middle here, and that is that sometimes trees will prevent or produce a really kind of bad tasting chemical, and that will ward off any predators, any deer or anything else that want to munch on it. Other plants will do that as well, but trees do that. And some of you, if you are a master gardener, probably know there's fungus that can help trees grow. Mycorrhizas in the soil, and that's a fungus that helps nutrient transfer. So just a few little interesting things there. There's some numbers that you can take a look at. 109% the average return for dollars spent on landscaping. So we spend a lot of cash to make our houses look good. And over 800 plus species of trees in the US. So just some interesting little factoids. All right, so we're going to dive in and we're going to look at a bunch of different stuff. So we're going to look at some suburban urban challenges that trees face. A lot of people just think they're plants, and they are, but they are very complex organisms, and there's a lot that go into a tree and keeping that tree healthy. So I'm here to kind of give you some of that trivia and give you some ideas about what kind of trees you might want to plant in your yard, sizes, ones that are more tolerant of certain things that you might find in urban areas or suburban areas. But first of all, let's take a look at this chart here. So we're going to look and basically we're seeing a decline in urban tree cover. I know a lot of us are really aware that the whole rainforest deforestation situation, and they plaster that all over the internet and media, but it's also a problem in suburbia. How many of us have driven by what used to be a beautiful old farm field or forest that has now been completely razed, and they're putting a subdivision there? Every single day I drive by that, and I'm sure you probably do too. Who knew there were still actual forests and fields left in Gwinnett County that you could drive by and see that happen? But that's the case. We're still building, it's still crazy. And instead of being selective about how they're doing that, they just cut everything down, and then they come back in and they plant little 5-gallon trees that are not going to do the same thing as those big, beautiful trees that were there to begin with. So Atlanta is not necessarily on this particular chart, but you can see that Seattle's on there, Los Angeles, some of the other large cities, along with some international cities, so that you can kind of see tree coverage versus population. So, kind of just some interesting trivia.
Interesting.
So some more challenges. Obviously, some people are going to be very intuitive, and that you're going to have a lot more pollutants from cars. You're going to have higher temperatures. You might have drought and flooding events also. Those poor trees that are there are going to have limited space to grow, both above ground and below ground. A lot of times they're put into these very boxy, they're called tree boxes basically, but they're highly engineered spaces along streets where these trees are put. You can see there's a little diagram here of what one looks like. There's a clean out port. Water can get in there. It soaks through. There's an under drain to remove too much water. Sometimes they will actually have irrigation systems built in there. They'll have a soil type media that may not actually be real soil. And it's all put into a box, a concrete box. UGA actually does some studies like this where they put different types of media in there. They want to see which medias will, provide more. Janet, could you please mute yourself?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
They'll provide different, the nutrients will release at different rates depending on the types of media that they're in. We also have to worry about human activities like soil compaction. How many people have walked along a city street and there's these boxes, little boxes with soil, and you have the tree? People are walking over the top of that. Those poor trees, the roots need oxygen. And when you compact that soil on there, it's very difficult for those roots to actually breathe. So in a lot of reason, what they try to do is with these tree boxes is that they will sometimes aerate them. So they have different ways of trying to fix these problems. Sometimes it's as simple as just excluding people. They might put a little fence around the tree, and that prevents people from walking over that area. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways that they can try to fix that problem. Other challenges: lightning strikes in urban suburban areas. Sometimes the trees are the tallest thing around, and they obviously lightning's going to go to the tallest thing, and sometimes that's a tree. So they have actual lightning rod systems that you can put into trees. We call some of these bigger, older trees champion trees, specimen trees. Some of these trees in urban areas or in parks are historic, and they want to protect them. So in order to do that, to make sure that they don't get struck by lightning, they install very expensive lightning rod systems. And so a lot of people will be crawling up in those trees and installing those, same as what they would do with a building. So why are urban trees important? Well, the very obvious one, they look pretty, and I personally would be not quite as happy if I was walking along a street that didn't have any trees. But trees have all sorts of benefits to suburban and urban areas, and they can lower the air temperature because of the shade that they provide through evapotranspiration. And that ultimately decreases electricity use on the grid and can help cooling, especially in the Southeast, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, on up into the Carolinas. It gets really hot here in the summertime. And when you have uh, a heat island effect going on, which you have a larger city, you can see there in the middle photo, there's the heat island effect. You can see the difference between rural areas, temperatures, and how much of a difference that is. And there's a lot of difference. And so you can't obviously have too many trees in a downtown area, but you can be strategic about the trees that you do have. And also, if you're in suburbia, planting those trees on certain sides of your house, your south, excuse me, the southern side, the southwestern side, or the western side, those are going to be the hottest sides. Obviously, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So it's not quite as intense and hot in the morning, but it is in the afternoon. So if you can strategically place those trees so that they provide the most shade at those optimal times, you can save a lot of money on your energy bills. Shaded surfaces sometimes can be cooler by, upwards of 70 degrees, 77 degrees. So that's quite a bit. And a single tree within 5 years can give you like 3% savings in your energy bill, and up to 12%, maybe a little bit more within 15 years. So most people would be really happy to get a return on that. For some, that could be quite a few hundreds of dollars per year. So I'm all for that, right? Oops. They also remove a lot of carbon dioxide from the air, and they sequester carbon. So they're going to keep that stored in the wood in their trunk. And that's when you cut those trees down and then you burn that, then you're going to release that. But as long as they are there and as long as they are alive, they're sequestering that carbon. A typical tree can store anywhere from 1 up to 22 tons of carbon dioxide in its lifetime. Just to compare, you can see a car will release about 50 tons over a period of about 10 years. So it's actually, sorry about that. It's actually a little bit, you know, if you look at it on a, trying to think of the best way to explain this, Atlanta is one of the most heavily treed cities in the US. So if we prevent and or plant back to put those trees there and or try to preserve the larger trees versus cutting them all down and starting basically from scratch, you can mitigate a lot of the carbon dioxide that's released into the atmosphere via the use of buses or cars or anything else in an urban situation. They do a great job and remove about 2/3 of all human related emissions. So, we need to kind of take that into account. So if you're looking at your backyard and you're saying, there's too many trees back there. I wish I had a little bit more sun because my gardens aren't doing as well as they used to. Keep that in mind. Sometimes we just have to decide, hey, we need to adapt. And instead of sunny gardening, we're going to be doing shade gardening or woodland gardening. So just kind of think about that and whether that makes sense, because trees are still plants and they are very useful to our environment. Obviously, here it's very hilly, so trees will hold that soil in and help prevent erosion. They do a lot of filtering. So when you have a little bush or you have some small garden plants, those obviously aren't going to be able to filter or use as much water as a large tree. If you think about a big oak tree that's about 100 feet tall, that's a lot of water. So they can also absorb excess nitrogen and phosphorus. And the leaves, some plants are actually really good at filtering out particulate matters from the air via air pollution. So, that's always a plus. I mean, I prefer to breathe cleaner air. Not to mention the fact that if you have some of these really big, old, gorgeous trees on your property, that's going to increase property values. I really wish that, I could convince some of these developers that it makes more sense to leave some of these trees in strategic areas versus cutting everything down and going back and planting little 5-gallon trees. Usually they're planting trees that don't work in the space either. I get a lot of calls about that. And I have to tell people that, yeah, I'm so sorry that that tree doesn't work there. You have too small a space and it's going to get too big. So education is a good thing. And of course, last but certainly not least, is trees provide all sorts of wildlife benefits, animals, insects, pollinators, and other natural vegetations, things like that. So we really want to preserve them as best as we can. So let's talk about choosing trees. That's actually probably why you came here. There's all sorts of different trees. There's bare root trees, excuse me. There's ball and burlap trees. There's container grown trees. There's all sorts of trees. And I did put a citrus tree in there. I do get that question quite often. Can we grow citrus here up in the Atlanta area? No, not yet. They are working on it. And I would say probably about Macon area is where that kind of the cutoff part is. So if you want to grow citrus, do what you see here, which is put it in a pot, get yourself one of those little rolling dolly things, put it on there, and put it outside for the summer. It'll be very happy over the summer, and then roll it into your house or your garage or your basement in the winter, and then you can have your citrus. All right, choosing a tree for a suburban urban yard. So, most of these are going to be the criteria you're going to use just for choosing a tree, but they work really well here, and I'll kind of expand on these. So you're going to look at the growing conditions, and that's going to be your sun and shade. Some trees do much better in understory situations where they have a lot of taller trees over them, and they prefer semi-shade to full shade. Some prefer sun. The type of soil, some like well drained, some like sandier, loamier, some like clay, and the space you have available. That's a biggie. So don't plant an oak tree that is going to get 200 feet tall and take up most of yours and your two neighbors' backyards if you're only on 1/10 of an acre, 2/10 of an acre. Pick something smaller, and we'll go over some selections for that. Identify the size and shape of a mature tree. So maybe you don't have a whole lot of space. You're in a very small area. Well, look at the different shapes that you can pick. So you can, if you look over in the top right, there are round trees. There's spreading pyramid shapes like a Christmas tree, ovals, conicals, vase shapes, columnar, open, weeping, and irregular shapes. There's all sorts of different natural shapes. You don't need to prune them. So if you don't have a lot of space, then you should gravitate towards something that will fit in there, like maybe a columnar tree or an oval tree, but you're going to want to stay away from a spreading tree because that's a really big and wide tree. You're going to have to decide, do you want to try to fit it into that small space? We don't recommend that. It's just not a good idea. It's a lot of work and it's really hard on the tree. We'll talk about that a little bit with respect to crepe myrtles. Are you growing it under a utility line? There are rules associated with that. You can't do that. They're going to go through periodically and they're going to clear that space. So you're going to lose your tree. So just be careful about that. Most times they'll leave things alone that are considered shrubs and don't get more than maybe 5 feet tall, but just you want to check with the utility company. And then shade, just they make devices that will allow you to check how many hours of sunlight you get per day, or just go out there at different times of year and try to figure out how many hours of sun or shade do you get every day. Maintenance, you might like that flowering tree, but is it going to produce all sorts of berries? Is it going to have acorns? Does it drop a lot of pieces of branch that, it's got a lot of really small branches? Um, is it going to drop those all throughout the year? A lot of people have pines and they hate it because twice a year you get pine straw everywhere. Some people like it. It's free pine straw. You don't have to buy it, but it's messy. So you're constantly going to have to blow your yard or rake your leaves or whatever. And then looking at where that tree is and where the placement is. Are you going to eventually have limbs that grow over your house or shed or garage? May not be a problem now, but if you have a spreading tree and it's too close to the house, you might be calling me saying, I have something in my attic and it's scratching and it's making a lot of noise. How did it get there? Well, when you have a tree that grows too close to your house, a lot of varmints, roof rats, possums, raccoons, squirrels, all sorts of things will use that as a highway to jump onto your roof and then get into your house because that's a nice, cozy little place for them to live. So make sure whatever you plant, whatever the mature canopy size is, you are at least like 15 feet away from the edge of your house. It's very important that you do that. Otherwise, you'll be spending a lot of money pruning. Choosing a healthy tree. You want healthy roots, and you can usually look at those. Sometimes it's harder when you're dealing with a bald burlap tree, but you don't want broken branches. You don't want girdling roots or the roots that are going to grow around the trunk because that's going to kill your tree. You want equal growth on either side of the tree. You want that to be a nice straight trunk. You want decent branching. You don't want codominant stems, which means you have two stems that grow up really close to each other. What that causes is what we call included bark. So where those two trunks meet, normally if it was one part of the tree, it would be the heartwood, and then you'd have bark around either side. But when you have two codominant trunks, there's bark on the inside. That's naturally a weak spot. You get a lot of that with Bradford pears. They have a really weak growth habit, but you can get that with any tree. Now you can fix it. You basically just have to drill a big bolt in there to hold them together, but it makes for a weak tree. So try to look for something that isn't that way. River birches, that's a very good example of a tree that has that problem. And of course, looking out for wildlife. So sometimes simply just choosing a native tree, one that maybe flowers, that's going to provide food for wildlife, pollinators, birds, other, raccoons, squirrels, that kind of stuff. So you want to try to help there where you can, because a lot of times in suburbia, that becomes just a desert out there. The landscapers don't necessarily choose the best trees for wildlife value or the best trees in general. So if you can go back and make your own choices, try to choose things that are actually going to be good for the environment. All right, so now my buttons are a little bit touchy. So we're going to talk about a few that you may have in your yard or ones that could be good for your yard. So a little gem magnolia. We all love its big cousin, the southern magnolia. It's a very huge tree, though. Very, very slow growing, but huge tree nonetheless. And not suitable for most of our smaller yards, unfortunately. If you have a really big yard, go ahead and plant it. It'll take a really long time to attain a size that's really going to be a problem. But if you want to not have to worry about it really ever, look at the little gem. It's going to reach, upwards of 15 to 20 feet tall and about 8 to 10 feet wide. So it's got more of a columnar type of shape versus the spreading that you'll see in a southern magnolia. So it's fairly compact, and you can put that in the landscape plantings around your house. It still blooms just like your regular old magnolia, your southern magnolia does, and the leaves look the same. Growth is very slow, and it's pretty easygoing. You can put that in a nice suburban or even an urban setting, and it'll do just fine once it's established. Don't forget, you still have to water things for that first year and a half. You can put it even in a container. Just make sure it's a decent size container. But I've seen people put these in containers on their back deck. You just have to be, more aware that you need to water more often. And these guys, again, do well in zone 7 through 10. So perfect, because we're now here in Gwinnett County considered an 8A. A certain number of holly species. There's more than what's here. So please note that, there's all sorts of different types of hollies out there that you can use. These are just some of the more popular ones. Yopon hollies, those are usually multi-stemmed, can be, put into like a shrub size or a tree size. I have a couple of them on my property. I've pruned them into trees, and they'll grow about 15 to 20 feet tall. So they are not too terribly tall. You can prune them. They're a really good screen between properties because they're an evergreen. So if you have annoying neighbors, you can use these. And they do produce a lot of berries. There are also different kinds of cultivars out there that are going to have different colored fruits. So if you don't want the old red fruit, then you can look for orange or yellow. The Nellie R. Stevens, very densely branching and easily shaped. So these are fairly, I guess, easy keepers with respect to street trees. So if you are, say, on a corner and you have a lot of traffic that's going by, maybe a stop sign, you get people that are cutting through your yard, you can plant these up as a little hedge. They can handle the exhaust from the cars. They're evergreen. They're a little thorny, so people are maybe a little bit more not as apt to run through your yard, and you don't have to do a whole lot to them. They're pretty easy to keep. Savannah holly, that's going to be a kind of an upright, more pyramidal type growth, similar to like a Christmas tree. And it does really well in tough sites. So you don't have, once it's established, you don't have to do a whole lot to it. But as with a lot of different types of plants that have heavy fruit loads, it can benefit from occasional fertilizer. The deodar cedar. So I'm hearing more and more about these, and they are very beautiful trees. They can get very large though. So in a certain area where it's kind of constrained, maybe 50 feet. Very slow growing, but in their native range, they could get upwards of 250 feet. And I've seen specimen trees around here in the Atlanta area. There's one out in Winterville near Athens. That tree is probably 120 feet, something like that. One thing I do want to add is that they are susceptible to certain types of beetles. They're attracted. So the older that tree gets, the more likely it's going to start emitting. It's not a pheromone because that's obviously an insect thing, but it seems to emit a gas that attracts some of these destructive insects. So often when you see an older deodar cedar, you'll note that the crown of the tree is actually missing. So the insects will be attracted to that wood. They'll girdle that top part, and that top part of the crown will break or be removed. And then you'll see some of the branches. So like for this instance, on this tree that you see here in the picture, you'll get two of the branches that will then take over that dominance, that apical dominance, and they will start to grow up and towards the sky. So it's interesting. It gives them a not Christmas tree look after a while, after they're older. But it's still, they're kind of old and gnarly, something that you might see on a mountainside. They're very interesting, neat trees. So I wouldn't, if you have the space for one, I would say consider putting one of these in. They're very soft needles. And, it takes a while for them to reach maturity. So note that it's a very slow grower, and they fit right in with our zone, 7 to 9. Shumard oaks. This is one that is often given away as a street tree. It can, reach 82 to 115 feet. So that's a little bit larger. It is an oak, but not as tall as some of the others. And they have pretty decent sized acorns. Excuse me. And they can survive in areas that maybe get a little too much water. So if you have a pretty hilly yard and maybe in the back part where it's kind of low and maybe water sits there, you can plant one of these if you have the space, and it will do just fine. It's not unhappy at all to have all of that water. And it will do just fine because between zones 5 and 10, and we're kind of smack in the middle, which is where you should be looking if you're going to put a tree in. American beech, so very pretty trees. These can be anywhere from 115 feet down to 50 feet. So their bark is kind of nice and smooth. It doesn't shed a lot like a river birch. And the leaves are really kind of simple. You can see I've got some pictures there. Just your typical, looks a little bit like an elm. And the tree will have flowers with both sexes. We call that monoecious. And it has a little nut, kind of like in a little husk, which if you plant it over your driveway or in your front yard, be aware of that because you'll probably run over those and it'll be kind of annoying if you're driving over that in your car or you try to walk on your driveway with bare feet. This is probably a backyard tree. But it is a very pretty tree, very nice and large, as you can see here, and thrives anywhere from zones 3 to 9. So I would call this a backyard tree. The southern sugar maple. You have to be careful and you have to look for this particular type. A northern sugar maple, like what you would see and or get syrup out of, is not what will do well here. Now you can buy them. I've seen them around and you can put them in the ground and they'll grow, but they don't like it. It's too hot and they eventually succumb to all sorts of different fungal issues and bacterial issues, and the tree will die. It won't live to its typical lifespan, which would be like, upwards of 50 to 70 years because it's meant for a more temperate climate. This one will grow all the way down to Florida. So it's much more tolerant of the temperatures that we have here and the humidity that we have here. So this is a southern sugar maple is what you should look for. It does well in full sun. It's 20 to 60 feet tall. Doesn't have a very wide spread. So it'd be great for a small quarter acre lot front yard. So a lot of these subdivision houses you see, they have one singular tree in the front yard. This would be a good choice for that. Has very pretty fall foliage, not quite as pretty as its northern neighbor, but still pretty nonetheless. And it does serve as food for all sorts of different birds and eating the little samanas or the maple seeds that you see there. And is also a host species for the rosy maple moth. I don't know if any of you have seen that. That's a cool little moth. It's pink and yellow, folks. I mean, that's really cool. I did have one of those on the window up in my mountain house in Rabun County. It was very large. It was like, I don't know if you can see, this big. And it was on the window and it was staring at me. It's kind of creepy, but they are very pretty moths. And these are good between zones 6B and 9A best of, but they're definitely a more southern tree. Carolina silver bell, 20 to 40 feet tall. So again, not very tall, and 20 to 30 feet, 35 feet wide, perfect for a front yard in a small quarter acre subdivision or even smaller. It's got nice white shaped flowers in the spring, does well in full sun, which is good because they cut all the other trees down. So there is no shade left. And it makes a great specimen plant in lawns. It will do okay in woodland gardens, and you can plant rhododendrons and azaleas nearby, and it will look very pretty near that. It's great for a host plant. Look at all the different hosts or species, 7 different moths and butterflies, eastern tiger swallowtail, morning cloak, eastern comma, red spot, purple, viceroy, and it has little clusters of fruit also for the birds, zones 4 to 8. So we are on the very southern end, but it will still do well here in a sheltered area. The Coosa dogwood. So we do have the flowering dogwood. That is our native that we have here. But, and I will recommend that, but I'm putting this here because mostly when we have subdivisions, we have what? No trees. So we have plenty of sun. And the Coosa dogwood can tolerate full sun. The flowering dogwood cannot. It is an understory tree and it will burn up. It will limp along and look really unhappy. It will only have about half its lifespan if you smack it in the middle of your yard with all that sun. But the Coosa dogwood would be much happier if you put it there because it likes full sun. So leave the flowering dogwood for your backyard along your tree line. And if you want something for the front yard as a specimen tree that flowers, look for the Coosa dogwood. It is still susceptible to pests. Also, dogwood anthracnose, that was bad a couple of years ago. It's susceptible to that also. But it does have positives. As I mentioned, it will attract hummingbirds, and it also is a host species for quite a few of the butterflies that I already mentioned. And it does have little berries. You can see those little red berries there. It will produce those for the birds. The eastern redbud. You have to be careful with these. If you have these they are native, but they can profusely seed, and a lot of those seeds, if they're happy, will germinate. So once you have one in your yard, you have to kind of be diligent about pulling out the seedlings. They are very pretty, and there are cultivars that are available. I didn't put any pictures of those here, but there are cultivars that are variegated, so you can get that creamy white and green. You can get autumn colors that are all year round. Flamethrower is one of the cultivars. It's absolutely beautiful. You have fall color all year round. Some of them will have white flowers, almost red flowers, or the pink that you see. So you don't have to go with just the heritage variety, which is what you see here. You can delve into some of the fancier ones if you want a specimen tree for your front yard. They're small, 20 to 30 feet by probably about the same, and they don't live a long time, 20 years or less, but they don't get very big, and they're perfect for a suburban yard. They do provide nectar. They're one of the first bloomers in the spring. We all see them on the side of the road. So, lots of bees. I've got a list there a mile long. So if you're a friend of the bees, these are a good option. And zones 4 to 8. So we're kind of on the southern end, but I will let you know they love my backyard. I have them all over the place and I pull them up every spring. They like it too much. Crepe myrtle. Okay, so crepe myrtles, there are older types that are more susceptible to powdery mildew, and then a lot of the newer cultivars have got some resistance to that. This is kind of old hat. We see these all over the place. Everybody loves crepe myrtles. You can get smaller ones. They have dwarf versions that don't get very big, and then of course some of the very big ones. But this is what we don't want to see, crepe myrtle. There's probably a few people on here who still think that that's the thing to do. Don't do that, folks. As you get them and they start to grow, you can definitely train them into a tree. So they can have kind of a vase shape, and you definitely want to prune them so that they grow up high enough so that if you have it near your mailbox, that you can pull your car out, or the Amazon guy doesn't run into it like he does mine all the time. But just try to train it to grow up and then let it go. There's no need to prune it every single year. When you do that, that poor tree has to use its reserve of nutrients from its root system to try to push through and make that new growth. And that uses more energy than it really needs to. So what you're doing is you're basically cutting the immune system of that tree down. And eventually what happens is we get something like ambrosia beetles, which took out a lot of figs last year, but usually attack crepe myrtles because they're weak. They grow fast, but they are using too many of those nutrients to try to regrow after they've been cut. So please, folks, don't do crepe myrtle. They do have that distinctive bark. The older they get, most of that'll peel away. It has a couple different colors. You can kind of see up in that top left on that picture. That's what the bark looks like. All sorts of different colors, whites and pinks and reds and purples. And I've even seen some that are kind of red with almost black foliage, which is very interesting. And they stay pretty small. And then the benefit is you can, they don't get more than about 30 feet anyway. So they're very, really a small tree. Just, please don't do the crepe murder, please. All right, choosing small trees for narrow gardens and tight spaces. So remember, I said there's different shapes that you can use, and keep in mind there's spreading and columnar and pyramidal and all of those. These are some suggestions on what you can use if you don't have a lot of space. So being aware that we do have smaller and smaller yard sizes in with houses, or even, maybe putting something in a pot on your back patio because you're in a townhouse, or you just, maybe an apartment on your balcony, something like that. You desire something, but you need something small. So you can consider a sky pencil holly. That would be number one. And you can see I've got a picture there. They're about 6 to 10 feet tall, 2 to 3 feet wide. So you could get a very large pot and put one of those in there. That would be a good option. Crimson spire oak. So most times oaks are going to be very, very tall, anywhere upwards of 200 feet tall. Some of the shorter ones that are suitable for a front yard might be 40 to 60, but generally they've got kind of a spreading shape, similar to what you see behind my head. But the crimson spire oak has a columnar shape, so they're great street trees, or if you have a very small backyard, because as you can see, number two, they're up to 40 feet tall, which is, fairly tall, but they're only 15 to 20 feet wide. They just don't spread out very well. So if you have a spot that you are required to plant a tree in via the HOA down by the street, in between the sidewalk and the street, you can try putting one of these in there. That would be a good option. You can also look at Japanese cherries. There are several. Yoshino cherry is a popular one. Trying to think of what the other one is. It's got a double bloom. There's probably like 8 varieties that are out there. Yoshino is probably the most familiar, and that's what you see down there in number 3. 25 feet tall, about 10 foot wide. It's a pretty tree. It flowers in the spring. Has a nice shape. And Japanese maples, very versatile. You can plant them in the ground. You can plant them in a pot. This one that you see here in 4 in a pot is going to be what we differentiate as a clone. So that means that they have taken rootstock from a seedling tree, which grows rather quickly and attains a large height. And they've grafted a pruning or a cutting onto that rootstock. It grows much slower. Those are all named varieties like Bloodgood and some of those. They're expensive, but they stay small for an infinite amount of time. Obviously, a lot of these can be used for bonsai, those tiny little trees that everybody thinks are really cool. But if you put it in a pot, you could attain a 10 to 25 foot tall. That's probably more of a seedling, and 10 to 15 foot wide. If you have one of the clones, it may only get 4 or 5 feet wide by the same amount tall. So if you have a tiny space, that might be a good option for you. Arborvitae, that would be 5. I think that looks like a typo. There are some, that definitely get taller than that. There are some varieties that will stay smaller. As you see here, this one is probably 15 to 20 feet tall, give or take, but they're very narrow and they're great for screen between your neighbors. If you have a really annoying dog that barks on the other side of the fence, you can put a line of these up. They're not going to take too much of your yard, and they will screen so the dog can't bark at you because they can't see you. And number 6, the redbud. So I mentioned the redbud already. 15 to 20 feet tall, lots of different cultivars out there. So if you want something a little different, go for it. They're a little more expensive, but the foliage is really pretty, and different colored flowers. So choosing a straight tree. What are the things that we're going to look at here? Well, you want it to have kind of a higher drought tolerance, because you're probably not going to put a lot of effort into dragging the hose out to the street and watering. We do see a lot when they're trying to establish these trees. We'll see the tree bags. those little plastic bags that go around the base of the trunk. They usually fill them up once and then they promptly forget them and they just sit there. So the trees that are along a street have to be very tough, both because of the drought tolerance, because they're only going to get whatever they get out of the sky. But they also have to be tolerant of air pollution because you get a lot of cars that go by, depending on how many people are coming or going. And it's important that it can deal with that high particulate matter. It's got to be a fairly long lasting tree. So you don't want something that's going to die in 20 years. You want something that's going to be fairly long lived. And you want to make sure that whatever the shape of that tree is, it's not going to interfere with street lights, line of sight, like your stop signs, utility lines, that kind of thing. We see that every day where people have planted trees that didn't need to be put in there and there was no thought put into it. That's why you should, and why a lot of cities do, hire city arborists to come in. And what they'll do is do an inventory. They'll come up with a plan. Sometimes they replace trees and they put ones that are much better suited for that in there. And they're the ones that are in charge of making sure that that city looks great for years and years to come. You also have to keep in mind root systems shouldn't affect underground utilities, sidewalks, or curbs. Some trees with deep tap roots, we don't have a lot of those around here, will heave up sidewalks and driveways. Honestly, though, if you plant it too close, the structural roots of the tree will do the same thing. So don't plant a rather large tree like a maple or a oak or something like that 5 feet from your driveway or 4 feet from your driveway, because those structural roots are the roots that eventually you see on the top of the ground. Those are the ones that are going to raise up and are going to cause your sidewalk or your driveway to crack. And then you either have to make the decision, do I want to lose the tree or do I want to just live with the damage to my driveway or my sidewalk? I get calls from people who are trying to make that hard decision. I try to counsel them to leave the tree alone because they're getting more benefits from it in the shade it provides and the energy efficiency versus having a pristine looking driveway. But sometimes the driveway wins. Examples of good street trees. Okay, so trident maples. I have one of these in my yard. It was just there in the woods, and it's very tolerant of drought and salt. We don't have a lot of salt here, but maybe you have a place down on the coast and you're looking for something to put down there. So this one is more tolerant. It has interesting shapes, and it does have very pretty fall color. The American hornbeam sounds kind of funny, but very adaptable. We see that in the forests around here, but it also can be a good urban or city tree. It does have kind of a yellowy, goldish color for fall. Bur oak, tolerant of very poor soils. We get a lot of that around here after the builders get a hold of it. There's not much left in the way of topsoil. It's just kind of heavy clay, and they can tolerate that. And they're very tolerant of a wide range of pHs. Eastern redbuds, again, tolerant of high soil pHs. It grows like a weed tree where it's happy. So you just have to be, cognizant of or thoughtful about where you're putting it because it's going to probably seed quite readily. Golden rain tree. These are very pretty trees. So first you see you have these pretty yellow flowers. And then I should have thought to put a picture of the fruits. You get these interesting little fruits that are kind of a reddish, orangey color in the fall, towards the fall. And then eventually you'll get some yellowish color to the foliage. So they have interesting, all seasons, interesting color. Ginkgos, everybody loves a ginkgo. They're really pretty trees and the leaves are gorgeous. Make sure if you're going to get a ginkgo, though, that you want a male. The fruit is stanky and you don't want to deal with that. So just make sure if you're purchasing a ginkgo for your yard, you get a male. Serviceberry, very sun tolerant and not something I necessarily would put right on the street. You do see the fruit there. It has a lot of interest both for wildlife, and you can eat that fruit. That is actually perfectly edible for people, and people do harvest that. So maybe putting that just to the side or away from the tree, the street, but close enough. They're not really tall, so it's a good option, but it will be something good to put in there for pollinators and wildlife. The Chinese pistache, this is a great tree, very tolerant of drought, which we have issues with here, but it has beautiful fall color and it has this really pretty kind of oval shape and nice trunk. So you can put this thing right in the middle of your postage stamp front yard. It won't overwhelm everything and you'll get that pretty color in the fall. We have a lot of these in the parks in Gwinnett County. Honey locust, very tolerant of pollution, drought, full sun. They are kind of thorny, so you probably want to look for some of the varieties out there, the cultivars that are thornless or have less thorns, but very tolerant of pollution. Has a very hard wood too, resistant to insects and that kind of thing. So here we'll kind of look a little bit more. Trident maple, you can see grows 25 to 30 feet tall. So a really good option. This one's growing through the utility lines. It's probably going to get pruned here not too soon, but if it had been planted about 5 to 6 feet further back, it would have been better. But either way, they do have a really pretty fall color. So you can see the shape of the leaf and the color there. The hornbeam, again, very tolerant of poor soils, doesn't get very tall, pretty shape, very resistant to pests. You do need to water it. So if you've got an area of your yard that maybe is a little lower, holds some water, this might be a good tree to put in there, as it does have a good root system. Be wary if you have a septic system, don't put this in your yard. It will find your septic system and clog your field lines. So that is not a good option if you are on septic. And you can see there what the leaves look like and the fall color. Bur oak, very pretty oak, similar to some of the rather large oaks in structure, but not in size. It's only about 90 feet tall, which is still pretty tall, but it is not nearly as tall as some of the others that could reach, 150 feet plus. Very tolerant of poor soils, heat, humidity, all those kinds of things. And these guys will have a taproot. They're kind of limited here in Georgia because of the soil type we have, the very heavy clay. We don't have a lot of topsoil here, but they will have one. Redbuds, all sorts of habitats, understories. They can also do well in sun and shade. They tend to get very lanky and leggy and grow taller in shade, but in a sunny situation, you can get a really pretty shape. And again, they have all sorts of really cool cultivars, very tolerant of all sorts of soil and air conditions, and can deal with this all sorts of different pHs in soil. And as evidenced by the fact that they rampantly seed everywhere if you have one of the heritage varieties. Golden rain tree, good street tree, tolerant of drought, heat, wind, all of that stuff, 30 to 40 feet tall. Good visual interest. As I said, you get these pretty yellow flowers, and then in the fall, you'll get these kind of Chinese lantern looking reddish fruits that look really pretty. And ginkgos, here's a ginkgo tree, beautiful, beautiful fall color, bright yellow. There are several metros that are known for their ginkgo trees, 40 to 50 feet tall. Just stay away from the female tree, stinky. Serviceberry, there's their fall color, and 6 to 25 feet tall. So you can literally prune this or keep it as a tall shrub if you would like, or prune it up into a tree shape. It just kind of depends on how you shape it as it's growing. Very resistant to air pollution and all of the typical stuff that I've mentioned. Chinese pistache, again, mentioned it's a very good tree for lots of reasons. Has a great shape, good fall color, not very tall. A lot of these in the parks around here, and just a good overall choice. Honey locust, these can get kind of tall, so this would be a backyard tree. There are some cultivars that are a little smaller than this, but I like the small leaves that don't require much raking and they don't block storm drains, which is a benefit A lot of times you'll see in the fall, all the leaves falling and people don't always blow their leaves or collect their leaves. And so if you've got an area that leaves build up, that ends up down in the storm drain that can clog things up before they break down. But these are very small leaves, so they don't tend to do the same kind of damage. All right, when should you plant trees? Let's run over some biology and when you should do that so that you can get optimal survival. So hot weather is going to obviously stress newly planted trees. Depend, any kind. It can be in a container, it can be a bald burlap, um, it could be a bare root. We don't want to plant those going into summer. I know they do that, and you can, but you have to baby them. Fall is the best time to plant, bar none. And that's for any plant, really, because when you're going into fall, your temperature is dropping, your evaporation rate's dropping, but that soil temperature is still nice and warm. So you plant that tree and that root system is going to have a good start to grow because the temperature is still going to be nice and warm in that soil, even though the air temperature is starting to drop. Typically, with a lower evaporation rate, you don't have to worry about, oops, I forgot to water the tree. So it's got till, if you put it in September or October, it's got till December or even January where it can grow and still be, have a pretty decent start. If you put that same tree in like April, sometimes we don't even get spring here. We skip right into summer. So you might go from, say, 60 degrees to 90. And then that evaporation rate hits the roof. You're not watering that tree enough, and you may have death. Trees they're not cheap. So I recommend, if you're thinking about adding in some new trees or changing out your landscape, make that plan to do it in the fall. That's, going to be your best bet. Evergreens can be planted earlier in the fall and later in the spring. But remember, that first year and a half after, you've got to baby that tree and water it. It needs 1.5 to 2 inches a week, and you've got to make sure that that's coming in, a regular, whether you're using some type of drip irrigation or something else, you got to make sure that it gets it. Otherwise, you run the risk of losing that tree. Cold damage, desiccation, it can pull that moisture right out of the leaves. So, and the roots. So beware of that. Don't go too late into the fall and winter. And ideally 6 to 8 weeks before soil freezes. That's going to be probably December, January here, maybe February, but try to backtrack from that. Planting bare root trees. So this can be a little more economical. They're usually smaller, cheaper, and you're going to plant those anywhere from late fall after the leaves drop to probably early spring. And ideally, you're going to get it. It's going to be probably pretty dry. So you're going to want to soak that for 15 or 20 minutes before you do anything. Go ahead and just put it in a bucket. You're going to want to dig that hole, and then you're going to backfill with a little bit of soil up underneath, and you're going to take those roots and spread that over that mound of soil in the bottom of the hole. There are a few master gardeners on here, and I think one of the questions on the last final was, how big does that hole need to be? 3 to 5 times the width of the root ball. So the bigger the better, because what you're doing is you're loosening that soil up so that tree's roots has an easier time growing through that. You're going to put that mass of roots over the top of that mound of soil in the hole, and you're going to make sure that the base of that trunk, the root flare there, is above or level with ground. You basically level with the ground. You don't want it below, you don't want it above, you want it level with the ground. And then you're going to backfill over the top of that root. This is a 2-person job on a bare root tree. It's much easier with 2 people. And then you're going to come back and maybe make a little ring around it to help hold water. And then you're going to put some mulch on there, no more than about 2 to 3 inches. I don't have a mulch volcano to put on here, but that is what we call it. You don't want to do that. What that does, if you do that, is a tree can then actually grow adventitious roots out of its trunk into that mulch. And then you call me later going, why does my tree look funny? Just don't do it, folks. Just don't do it. And make sure, just like in a balled and burlapped or container grown tree, that you keep that soil moist for the first year, year and a half. Containerized trees, very similar. Dig your hole 2 to 3 times the width, because remember, you've got all the root ball and the soil and everything in there. Look at that root system. If you've got any roots they're wrapping around, that's called a girdling root, cut it and get rid of it, because it's going to choke and kill off your tree. Then you want to put it in there, making sure that, again, that root flare is at ground level, and don't add amendments in there. I know a lot of people want to take a bag of topsoil and mix that in with that heavy clay soil. Just don't do it. There are scientific reasons behind that. What they've shown is that the root ball of the tree, you can go in there and score the root ball to encourage those roots to grow, but roots are picky. And just like we don't want to leave the air conditioning in our houses when it's 100 degrees outside, so too does the root system of that tree not want to leave that really nice loamy soil that you have so carefully put into that hole to amend that horrible heavy clay soil. So what happens when we hit a drought? If you're not watering regularly, those roots they're only going to be in that hole where you've amended that soil. They're not going to foray out into the surrounding soil because they don't like it. So the tree's only going to have whatever moisture happens to be right in that loosened area that you've done that for, and then it's not going to really venture out into the surrounding soil. But if you use the native soil and you just loosen it up for the tree, it will send its root system out, and it will have a much stronger root system in the end. And you here can, of course, put the berm around there for water, and add about 2 to 3 inches of mulch. Balled and burlap. These are usually bigger trees, quite a bit bigger. They're also very expensive, several hundreds of dollars or more. And you want to make sure, because sometimes they use a synthetic burlap, you don't want to just dump the whole thing in the hole. You can see here they used a backhoe, but you can, of course, dig it out with a shovel. You're going to want to clip the twine or the wire or whatever is being used to hold that burlap on that tree. You don't want to do that until it's in the hole. So after you get the tree in the hole, you're going to go down there with a pair of pliers and you're going to clip all those little areas on there. And if you can remove it, all the better. So clip as much of it off as you can. There might be some on the bottom that you can't reach, but whatever you can get off, that's good. We don't know if it's synthetic or natural burlap. Assume it's synthetic. So you might want to go ahead and slice and try to remove as much of that as you can. And just try to clean it up as much as you can. Loosen the edges of the root ball so that you're getting that tree that's sending some messages that it needs to actually start growing some new roots on that root system. Make sure it's nice and upright, and that root flare or that trunk flare is right at ground level and not below it or above it. And go ahead and start backfilling. And then make sure that you look at the directions down here, because this is a bigger tree and it's had some of its roots clipped off, because that's what they do. They're using one of these large tree diggers that kind of go in and then get that root system and clip off some of that root system, and then they remove the whole thing out, ball and burlap it. It's missing its roots. So you have to actually baby these more than you would a container grown tree. So in this case, apply 3 gallons of water per inch of trunk diameter 2 times a week that first season. So if you have a 4-inch tree, which that'd be a pretty sizable tree, maybe we'll just say 2 inches. So 6 gallons of water twice a week, 12 gallons of water a week, that's a lot. But if you have a sprinkler system, it's doable. And it will definitely help if you add mulch. That helps the evaporation rate. Definitely keeps that down. Staking. Everybody wants to stake. They think it's going to help that tree. It's debatable. Trees will have something called reaction wood that strengthens them. but a lot of people want to stake them anyway. And going back, the reaction wood is caused from the bending of the trunk because of the wind that is cause, and then it will cause it to actually strengthen that wood more so than if it had a some type of a support on it. But you can see here, a lot of times people are concerned, so they're going to go ahead and stake that tree. Go ahead if you want to, but make sure you come back after that first year and remove all of those supports, because so many pictures come in of trees that have been forgotten about, and this is all grown into their, into their trunks, or just a variety of bad things. I have all sorts of pictures that I can show of supports gone bad. Haha. But if you're going to do it, make sure whatever you're doing, that you're doing it so it's not going to dig into the tree. So old garden hose is often used. You can buy professional grade, commercial grade stuff, but make sure you remove it after the first year. Very important to do that. Pruning your tree, do I or don't I? Well, the reasons you would: removing dead branches. You get rid of those at any time. You want to get those because those can be a pest entrance, especially storm damage. You might want to thin that tree out. Maybe you have a peach tree, and the way to do the peach is you want a bowl. Well, they don't come like that. You have to actually prune them. If you've got rubbers, like rubbing branches that are rubbing against each other, you can see that one there, that middle one. That branch, it's going to rub right through the bark. That's an entrance for disease or insects. So you want to take that smaller branch out and remove it. That tree will heal itself. They have the ability to do that. Maybe obstructions over sidewalks, traffic views, that's called risk. You want to not have undue risk. So if you've got branches or things that are overhanging driveways or houses or sidewalks, those are best to be removed. Try to do it when the tree is younger so that you don't impact it. Trees with a young immune system can tolerate that much more so than an older tree. Just like an old human that has an impacted immune system, so too does a tree. And the more branches you remove, the worse off it will do. Usually, and I think one of these slides will have it on there, don't take more than about 25% of the tree branches, any of that, in any given year. Usually you wait a couple years in between pruning to do that. Get suckers, because they're going to take the nutrients from the main tree, because they grow very fast. That's why they call them suckers. And you want to keep that tree from getting too close to utility signs, lines, all of that. And of course, to shape the tree, like with crepe myrtles. When to prune, dead branches anytime, storm damage anytime, crossing branches or rubbing branches anytime. Late fall, early winter, that's the best time to prune deciduous trees or trees that lose their leaves in the winter time. Evergreens can be lightly pruned in late winter, and spring blooming trees can be pruned shortly after blooming, because they're going to set buds on last year's growth. So that gives them the whole summer and fall to grow new wood, and they'll set bloom on that. Trees blooming in late spring or summer can be pruned in late winter, because they're going to set buds on new growth. And usually when you prune in the wintertime, you're going to get an explosion of spring growth. That tree is going to try to mitigate or overcome all of that pruning, and so it will start to grow. So just beware, you'll have to do that process again. And then summer pruning slows or changes growth patterns. So just kind of keep those things in the back of your head. Tips for pruning: make sure that those implements are nice and sharp, and you want to make sure you disinfect after you cut a diseased tree. So if you have, let's say, a pear tree or an apple tree and you got fire blight, make sure that you're disinfecting your pruners in between. You're going to spread it if you don't. Get rid of diseased, dying, or damaged stuff. And again, here's where I was talking about. Don't take more than about 25%. And I told you why. figure out what the skeleton or the scaffolding branches are, avoid those because that's what's holding the tree up. Same thing with the root system. Some people are like, oh, I've got to go and dig in my septic tank, and they take out half the root system of the tree. I was at a unnamed Gwinnett Park the other day where they had laid a beautiful new blacktop path through the woods, and there was a pine tree that was listing very dangerously over the path. And I was asked to go take a look. So I did. I went over and took a look, and I noted that they carved out the root system when they were putting the base in for the path. They took out the roots all along that side. So that poor pine tree had zero support on that side. That was why it was canted at a 45-degree angle, just being held up by a tree across the way. So you can't cut the root system out. You can't do that. It's the support for the tree. Same thing with the branches up in the crown. Train young trees versus going back and butchering older trees. And you want that one trunk. You don't want codominant stems because that gives you the included bark. Sorry. Eliminate branches that grow inward. That's going to cause problems, probably rubbing, other things. Just get rid of them, prune them out. And prune it at a 45-degree angle to prevent water damage. You're going to do that anyway. Most of us know if you're doing roses or shrubs or whatever, prune it at an angle because then the water just runs down and it's not a problem. It doesn't sit on there and cause disease. Painting the cut is not recommended. You can still buy this stuff, folks, but it's not recommended. Plants, trees, shrubs have the wonderful ability to compartmentalize any type of pruning damage. It's as long as the tree is healthy, it has basically 4 walls. It will wall off that damage and it prevents any of that rot from getting in there. So if you do see a tree that has rot, likely it had other issues. But generally speaking, they can take care of themselves. You don't need to put that on there. Making the cut. For thick branches, you're going to do the 3-cut method. Kind of running a little late here. I like to talk, apparently. This one you're going to use on a thicker branch, something that's 2 to 3 inches. And there's different types of pruning: crown thinning, crown raising, crown reduction, that kind of thing. But you're going to want to make sure the overarching theme here is you want to get that heavy far part of the branch off first. And then when you've gotten rid of that and all the weight is off, you're going to come down and take it towards the branch collar, and then the tree can heal itself. So if you see a tree that's had a good cut done to it, it'll have kind of a knuckled over growth and maybe a little round area. That tree has healed itself. And let's see. Challenges, difficult growing conditions. We kind of already went over those. Insect and fungal pests, got a lot of that. Bagworms, scale, galls, fungal diseases, got a lot of that. Get a lot of calls every single spring and fall and summer for some people that missed last seasons, and now they're dealing with it. Lots of mechanical damage. Holy cow. You can see the lawnmower damage there on the far right. It's beat away pretty much half the trunk on that. That tree's going to die. Once you reach critical mass at about 50%, the tree's not long for this world. So try to minimize that. That's why we always say put a nice diameter of mulch around the tree to help prevent you from doing stringer damage for a string trimmer or a lawnmower. And neglecting, just not taking care of it properly, leaving it staked, roots heaving, insufficient space for growth, that kind of stuff. You can see that on the far left. What can you do? Plant a native tree. You got a pawpaw up there. Those are kind of interesting and native to this area. Get a food forest, have something like that in your yard. A lot of the parks around here are doing that. Plant a tree for Earth Day or Arbor Day. Use cloth instead of paper. Disease-resistant plants. And check with your community to see what kind of events they're doing. We had one over here at Slow Pour Brewery called Our Pour Day, and Georgia Forestry Commission gave away trees. So, check to see what's in your neighborhood and what's in your city. All right. So that is the presentation, and it is being recorded. So it will be at the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel. You can see the QR code down there. It'll be up probably sometime early next week, I would imagine, if you want to rewatch this. I zoomed through a little bit since we were running a little bit late, but you can check it out later if you would like to. I try to do these classes a couple times a month and new and different stuff all the time. Got another lineup of some good things coming up from June on for the summer months. And you can see those at the other QR code to the left. And you can sign up for our events and classes. Sometimes the link is already posted, I think. Excuse me, allergies are getting to me. The main extension website, I believe these have been posted there, and they may have the link. I do send that out also. So that is basically it. Does anybody have any questions? Let's see. Jean says, if you get a golden rain tree, you will have little trees coming up in every flower bed in your yard and the neighbors' yards for years. Ask me how I know. Probably about the same way I know that red buds will do the same thing, Jean. So yes, be aware that some of these do make copious amounts of seed, and you may need to be careful and make sure you get that seed up. So there may be some maintenance requirements that you have to kind of keep in mind so that you don't have to deal with little seeds or little trees coming up in your neighbor's flower beds. Does anybody else have any questions for me? It's very quiet. Crypto myrtle, crepe myrtle. What about crepe myrtles? Let's see. It follows the best time to plant trees. Why does Arbor Day Foundation send out baby trees in April? Good question. Georgia actually has its own Arbor Day in, I think it's February. So that's a better time to plant in February. So I tell everyone, if you want to observe Arbor Day, observe Georgia's Arbor Day. It is more adjusting for the seasonal weather that we have here. So if you're up in Minnesota, Arbor Day in April would be perfect because the trees have not started to leaf out. Your spring is probably not going to come until close to June, but here we've already had spring. So you're correct. And you have to baby them quite a bit more when it's April because you're going into the warmer months. So just make sure you're watering them. Let's see. No, Arbor Day is the National Arbor Day is not the best day to wait to plant trees. Plant them in the fall, ignore Arbor Day. The fall, anytime in the fall is best. If you want to plant and observe some type of Arbor Day, Georgia's Arbor Day. If somebody wants to Google that and put that in the chat box as to when that is, you're welcome to do that. What is shade versus sun? For crepe myrtles? If you want to unmute yourself and ask if that's easier.
Yes, I'm just wondering, a lot of the trees that were presented, I wasn't sure which ones needed sun and which ones needed shade.
Yeah, I tried to verbally talk about those, and some of the descriptor slides did have that in there. Most of what I presented is going to be very tolerant of full sun because most of the suburban yards that you're going to see around here, especially where you're going to want to plant a tree, it's either going to be a street tree or it's going to be in your front yard. And those typically don't have anything else around there. They're very limited because the developers have come in and cut everything down. So most of those trees that are considered street trees or good for a suburban or urban environment are going to be full sun, or they may tolerate anywhere from full sun all the way to part shade. The only one that was in there that I think I really mentioned that really prefers shade is going to be a flowering dogwood. And I specifically mentioned that because a lot of people really love those trees and they want to put them out in the middle of their sunny front yard. And flowering dogwoods are not sunny trees. They're understory trees, meaning they much prefer morning sun with afternoon shade or a dappled shade. And they will be very unhappy in your front yard. So I would say that's the only one that really, and it's a native. You can put that in the backyard along a tree line. I think that's a good place. But the Coosa dogwood can tolerate full sun, as is everything else. Let's see. Georgia Arbor Day, February 16th. There you go. That's a good time to plant if you're going to do that, but you still have to make sure you water everything. Did you
I was just going to say that the crepe myrtles will pop up everywhere.
Depending on what type it is. Some of the older heritage varieties are definitely prolific seeders, and you have to be careful about those. I usually just try to sweep them up and, get them out of there after they drop seed before, they ever have an opportunity. But inevitably, I've got one up by my mailbox. I'm constantly pulling little seedlings out for a good portion of the summer. It's not as bad as kudzu, though. All right, let's see. Opinion on olive trees in zone 8. You can try it. I am of an opinion that we're still a 7-8. I know they changed it to 8A, but we are what is considered a transition zone, and we can flip-flop between the two. We still get temperatures below 5. I mean, we do occasionally. If you want to try it, go for it and try it and see. I say that, as in, if it's not too terribly expensive, if you want to put it in a pot on a dolly and roll it around, then you don't have to worry quite as much, because if we do get some of that really super cold weather, you can roll it in the garage and it'll be safe, because you're not going to be able to put anything over the top of it. Last year, when we had 60 hours of below zero weather, we lost a lot of stuff. And in my opinion, it probably would have lost the olive if you had had it at that point. But you can try it. And, they continue to do research and they continue to do genetic selection to try to push a lot of these southern trees, citrus, olives, a lot of these things in more temperate more tropical climates further north. And, this may be one. If you can, you got a good one, then, good deal. Are we over freeze time? No, we are not. In fact, I think tonight or tomorrow, they're saying that there's going to be another frost. I usually just say tax time, April 15th, April 12th or 15th. Usually that is anytime after that, it's safe to plant, but always listen to your weather station or whoever you're listening to, Channel 11 or Fox 5, whatever, because they usually have a 10-day forecast. They can see out 10 days, but the last average date, and I think it's April 9th, but just watch and see what they say. Should I bring in tomato starters? I would, or I would cover them. I don't think it's a hard freeze. Again, I haven't really looked at it because I haven't put anything out yet, but definitely cover just to be on the safe side. Anything that you've put out there that you don't want to get zapped. If it's been out there for a bit, then it's probably hardened. So it's a little bit more tolerant, but I would still throw something over the top of them, or just bring it in your garage just to be on the safe side. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. And hopefully you guys learned a little bit about trees and what kinds of trees that you would select in a suburban urban situation. I want to give a shout out to my mom. Shirley Baum over there. She helped me put this together, and I really appreciate her help. It's really crazy. I had, I think, 12 or 14 programs that I was teaching this last month. I have barely enough time. Sometimes I wonder to breathe, but it's fun and I enjoy it. So hopefully I'll learn something. And now time to go and have dinner. We'll see y'all later. Bye.